Hello, my friends. I'm Shay Marville. Welcome to the second season of Let's Talk, a podcast dedicated to healing and growing through conversations, stories, and deep listening. We are an alchemy of one another. Talking helps us to relieve our burdens, to suffer less, because we are each other's medicine if we choose. So let's talk. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Let's Talk. On today's episode, I have the very profound privilege and honor to have one of the great Canadian writers in the house, in the pod with me, Katherine Govier. Katherine is a novelist, essayist, activist, thinker of thinkers. Katherine, welcome to Let's Talk. So let's talk.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm so fond of you and respect you so much for all that you're able to do and finding your way in this way. It's been fantastic to see.
Oh, thank you. I'm so grateful that you're here, and I am so curious about your experience as a writer over the last 18 months. You know, how have you been perceiving this transformation and wildness that we've been going through?
Well, it's a great question, and one that I visited a little bit before in something that I wrote and spoke about with Japanese writers. It's as if writers from different countries wanted to know, well, what are you thinking? What are you thinking about? And there were so many kind of mixed messages for us as people who produce books, and also as people who kind of watch the world and you know, are meant to be reflecting it. In one way, we're being told, this is a fabulous time for books. People are returning to reading because they don't have much else to do.
Right, right.
We get that message. We also get the message that books are just absolutely not selling well. So what does that mean? Then we have to think about the work that is being delayed, the industrial side of writing. You know, how is the actual business of it carrying on when people are not going to work and so on, offices are not really operating. And then we have to think about what we want to say about this world. And I know for myself, you know, I'm in the middle of a novel. I'm very close to the end of it now. But in fact, I hope that I'm done with it in sort of 3 days, because this is a revision. Does the pandemic enter into this? I mean, am I writing about people who go somewhere and then meet afterwards at a bar? Or not? Is that a thing of the past? Are we to reflect on exactly what this time is in our life, where we're more isolated and where the world is so fragmented and leadership is so weak? You know, what is our position? We can't really see the future, but is this a permanent kind of thing for us? I think there are so many questions.
Yes, there's so many questions. I know that we fluctuate between, the book business is coming back and, you know, we're going to get this sort of revolution or this renaissance in books because people are so interested in reading now. But I think, and of course we don't know, there's other things happening, you know, the audio platform and audiobooks and podcasts and different ways of writing are really growing. But I think it has never been more, writers have never been more relevant than right now, because we need the processing, the thinking, the thinkers who are saying, you know, who are asking, what does this moment mean?
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. And I so hope that you are right. And when you talk about thinking and processing, this is something that occurs over time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not knee-jerk, instant, you know,
yes.
I'm reacting, you know, this happened, that happened, I'm here, I'm there. We've got a lot of that. And that's important to know, well, how are people feeling today? We're afraid, you know, we're angry, whatever. But the longer term, the longer story of this, I think I think it will take writers who really sit down and wrestle with the material over some time to really digest what is happening.
Well, and also wrestle with the discord in our culture in terms of all these different opinions competing and, and then people canceling people when they don't agree with them rather than, can you discourse with somebody? Like, can you have a dialogue with somebody that you may not agree with, but you feel that their position is important to hear? And writing and essays and novels are so important in doing that kind of thinking, I think.
I think you're right. I am so grateful to hear you say that, because I know there certainly is a movement where, we're all impatient. I mean, this is a moment. The world's going to come back, but it's going to be something completely different. We're going to have equality and not poverty. And, we're going to have, sexes are going to be equal, and all these wonderful improvements, are going to be like this. And many people who are pushing for those things don't have patience. And you can understand that.
That's
but
right.
When you want something instantly, this is when this such discord really begins. It's your word, yes. Really, but it is discord. I mean, it's like something in music. It's like, things that
yes.
are something that don't go together.
Do you feel, you've been writing for many decades, and you've written so much about historical women and different periods of time and in different parts of the world. Do you feel like are you inspired right now to create more and to write about this present, or do you find yourself wanting to go back into the past?
No, I'm through with the past. in 3 days, I'm through with this novel, which is set in the past. But, I am, as you say, I've been doing this for years, and I can sense that, my time is growing more and more limited. And there are things that I really want to get to about my generation in this time,
Yes.
like what's happening to us, and how are we adjusting, and how are we accepting? That I have something in my mind that's called lights out, which is, all these baby boomers and all these people from the 60s with all this, wonderful inspired visions and so on. And yes. Where are we now, and what's happening to us now, and what do we, how do we see this world and our part in it?
Oh, I'm so excited that you're asking that question, because I like, here I am, I'm Generation X, I'm 50, and the changes that I've seen are mind-blowing just in my lifetime. And what I wonder about are people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who are, well and happy and doing different things with their lives. How do they perceive themselves in a new world where, gender is different, where, class and race, all these things we grew up with, right, that were kind of carved in stone, are now being taken apart. And also what you can do and how you see yourself, like what you can be is completely different. Your age even now is not a barrier to entry to anything, really, right? It's about energy, right? Yeah. Like, so I'm really curious. I think we hear a lot from Generation Z and millennials, and then, Generation X kind of gets lost in there. But I'm really curious about boomers, about what they're creating now. And do they feel inspired, or do they feel overwhelmed?
Well, it's a huge question, and I'm really glad that someone is interested in us who is not us. I mean, I'm 20 years old.
I will be soon.
Well, that's the thing. You will all be us at some point.
Hopefully.
But, how are we? Or so what are people like at 70 and when they've done this and that, and now they seem to be pushed off the stage, or, or they want off the stage. They don't want to work anymore. We're leaving this to the others. I think it can be very tempting for people like us to sit around and complain and project lack of success on all these changes. But there are many others who relate to this too, as it is like the 60s. It is like a whole new burst of enthusiasm for justice, And I myself, of course, have always lived in a world that was full of people from all over the world, and full of women who achieved too. My father was a dean of engineering at the university in Edmonton.
Yes.
As I was growing up in the 50s, I mean, from Turkey, from Pakistan, from China, the scientific people came and built this fantastic faith in science and the new ways of doing things. And I still think that, that's the hope. I love science. I love invention. I think we can make things better. I love that Canadians like to talk about it. I love our dialogue. I know there are places now where you can't engage in dialogue with people because they seem to be just on the other side, and we're not going to waste our time and so on. But I think dialogue is so wonderful. I've seen people just blossom with just being able to say where they stand.
Exactly. Is that why you were so inspired to found the Shoe Project, which is a project that is about giving a stage and voice and mentorship to newcomers and immigrant women about how they came to Canada or to the area they're living in, and the shoes that they traveled in to get here? Was that part of the impetus for that?
I think it may have been, although maybe unconsciously at the time. I remember talking about these things. And I remember one meeting where you actually came yourself, Jay. We were honored with your vibrant and interesting presence. And I remember some of these women sitting around and you talking about, how it had been with your mother and who was an immigrant. I remember you saying, the other women, you saying, oh, I had to deal with this, that, and the other. And the other women saying, you mean this goes on to the second generation? I mean, that was kind of the naivete where we were at that point. But for me, I think with many of those early days in the Shoe Project, it was simple human curiosity. I mean, some of those women were clearly fascinating people, but they did not have the richness of personal expression to let anyone know who they really were. And I wanted to know them. I wanted to know. I wanted to know Yoko. I wanted to know Mariam from Iran. I wanted to know Tinaz and others who had far less English. And as I came to know them, I realized, what they could do for us all in this country, how they could be this country. And that's really kind of where it started. And to gather that world around me, I find sometimes people in Canada are a little shut off from the rest of the world. And especially now because we're not traveling so much.
Yes.
We cannot travel so much. But to hear what it's like in Turkey from a female ophthalmologist who had to flee, that's something very valuable to me.
Truly.
That's an insight into the world that I would never otherwise have.
This was about 10 years ago, when I was involved in a few of the events. And one of the most profound conversations I've ever heard was between a number of women who were all Muslim in the group. And some wore the hijab and some did not. And the conversation about their choice and their decision to do so and not do so. And I remember thinking, my God, I wish this conversation was public because it is so authentic and it's about the culture that these women were coming from, their experience, but also how they perceive themselves as women. Right. And it was everything. It was sexuality. It was, their rights there. And it was a nuanced conversation that we don't really have publicly about being a Muslim woman and being covered or not covered and why people make that choice or not if they have the choice. And it was extremely powerful.
Yeah, I found so many of those things just mind blowing. And I would come home and I would tell people, I heard this, I saw this happen. I don't know if they could have been had if it had been public.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. You're right.
These were private. We set up a room with some tea cups and everyone helped make tea and people brought little treats at time. And we created this space where you could talk as you wanted without fear. It was powerful. It still is powerful. And what we do try to do, of course, is take the nuggets here and build a story around the shoes, which can then be shared publicly.
Yes,
it has to start from this feeling that, you really can disburden yourself. But I remember one of the women from Syria saying, in this very surprised voice, I'm in Canada. I can talk, so I should talk.
Unbelievable. Do you feel as a woman, have you seen massive change, or do you feel like it's kind of stop and go? How do you see how women have evolved in the last, 40 years?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Shay. You ask really good questions. I think there is a lot of progress on the outside. Mm. I wonder about the inside.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, I wonder how women really feel. I wonder if women have really, if any of us has really fully digested and integrated the kind of choices and tough work that we have to do. I mean, one thing I'll tell you I've learned from this is women work so hard.
So hard.
They work so hard that whatever their job is, they do that. They're still hugely involved. I haven't met too many women for whom childcare and housekeeping duties have completely been shared equally. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I haven't met too many. One thing you see with immigration, another thing is the responsibility to save those children, to keep those children alive. Yeah. And it is felt in almost every story of how people come here. And it is a huge thing, I mean, often families are separated, often men haven't survived. But, women, all of these, we may have lots of lawyers and parliamentarians, and all of this is good if they have the right ideas, but men can have those ideas too, I suppose. But how much if you look at it globally, how far have we come in changing, the unequal burdens upon women?
Yeah. I think I'm so grateful that you're saying it, because I sometimes feel guilty about this. And I have a partner, I have a male partner who is, very much, half the household and is, helping and doing lots of domestic chores. Although his memory about doing them is sometimes a bit funny, but that's a whole different subject. But I sometimes feel guilty because I do feel that there's so much work sometimes domestically, and that is with a partner who's helping, that it does. I have to admit, sometimes it prevents me from doing other things that are about my professional life and growing that professional life. And I remember being in politics for a short period. And I remember before a debate, one of my kids fell down at school. And so we ended up at Emerge. And an hour before the debate, I was at Emerge. And then I went to the debate. And then after the debate, I went home and I did laundry. And so, and I remember talking to my mom about this. She said, "Well, who's going to do who did you want to do the laundry? Do you want a servant? Like, who's going to do the laundry?" And I said, "Well, it's not that. It's just that the laundry has to get done, and also we have to also participate in the debate. Both have to happen." And I think sometimes we're juggling so much and so much rushing that I think we have a whole generation, multi-generation of women who are just exhausted. They may be more free than their mothers, but they are more exhausted, I think, than any other time in our history. That's just my observation.
I think you're probably right. There is a huge amount that, as you say, has to be done. And women's lives, I think, tend to be much more a patchwork of, that public stuff that has to be done, like the debate, and that laundry that has to be done.
Yes.
We have to become good at changing shape. And I think this is of great benefit to us in a way. I mean, going back to those early conversations at the Shoe Project, I remember talking about how, a psychologist from Turkey was complaining that as an immigrant in Canada, she was looked down upon. She didn't have the status that she had back home in Turkey. Because
I remember that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it was Tinaz or someone said, well, yes, because it's okay. We can handle that because women are always taking different shapes. We're used to be seen in different ways. I mean, sometimes we're pregnant. Sometimes we're seen as just sort of an old woman, wanting something. We don't carry seamlessly and always our status and our knowledge and so on. It can disappear from us, so we can be seen, as something much less. And we can deal with that.
Yes.
Whereas, the loss of stature, pride, etc., sometimes for a man coming to Canada is much harder. Not that loss of stature should ever exist, but it is something that kind of allows women to transform.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly why there have been so many women who have come to Canada or they immigrate to another country by themselves with their children, because they're able to embrace the idea that they might have to be less in order to have more later on. Whereas for some males, that loss of status that they've worked for, or they that has been their embodiment, it makes it hard for them to conceive of starting from zero, when they go to a new country. And it's so hard when you're going to a new country if you don't speak the language, or you don't have the education that is acceptable, I'm using air quotes, and that you really have to make yourself over again. Not everybody can.
Yes, it's really true. I think people who do it, they find it, they've made themselves over, but there's some kind of a circle to it that they can come back in a different way to what they were. We have to know that it's not all losses. We can somehow regain the strengths, or the compassions, or the interests, the skills that we had back in China.
Right.
When we can bring them here after 10 years or 20 years, as you point out, it's a long process.
Yeah, or you get to reimagine yourself as something else that maybe couldn't exist in the country that you're from. Now, of course, you didn't immigrate from another country to Canada, but you did come from Alberta to Ontario. That's a big difference, right? There's some big changes.
500 miles. And a long way.
But culturally, like, what do you? It was a big difference, wasn't it?
It certainly was. I came here as a graduate student, and I found I mean, I had grown up in this university environment with people from all over the world, but I came here to Toronto and found out, oh, they think Alberta is the Texas of Canada and that everyone's very right wing and it's all about oil. And I remember I couldn't really understand this. I felt completely not known or seen here. And the social, there are still lots of differences in a
Yes.
social way. And in Ontario, it is kind of known and recognized that there are old families and kind of an elite built in and so on.
Yes.
Alberta really wasn't like that.
Mm,
Anything more like that. I mean, it's been almost 20 years. I still
yes.
have a place there, and I go often, and my parents were there. But there is a different culture building there now. But there was certainly that was different when I first came here.
Did you grow up close to Canmore, Alberta? Because I read that you created the shoe project in Canmore as well.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised because it seemed, I mean, Canmore is it's extraordinary with the mountains. And I was excited to hear that you had been able to establish something in that area.
Well, Canmore is really one of our best chapters. We have 6 chapters, and 3 of them are in Alberta. I have to say,
Oh, is that right?
This is how Alberta is not. It is not the cliche. I'm sorry, the government is not the.
Yes, yes.
But
It's very diverse and and dynamic there.
Lots of educated people, lots of energy, lots of sort of get out and do it. And as I say, less of this kind of layered society, I think, than there is in the East. But yes, in Canmore, because it was my second home and I was going there often, my parents were still alive when the Shoe Project began. It became the second chapter. Canmore is quite a small town. I think it's maybe 13,000 now, as opposed to in Toronto, which is what, 4.5 million when you take it. So very, very different. But there's an artist-run center in town, and they've taken on the Shoe Project, and they work every year to find women, and they put on the performance in the theater, and everyone loves it. I mean, it's really been adopted by the town.
Yes, this is what I've heard. And so I did some work in Canmore for 4 years. Yeah. I worked with a retirement community and called Origin Active Living.
Okay,
and
I know what it is.
Yeah. And so I spent a lot of time in Canmore and I was blown away by the community and the culture. The food is outstanding. And so anywhere where there's good food, I'm happy to be. But I heard somebody whisper about the Shoe Project while I was in Cadmore, and I thought, are we talking about the same thing? And then I was just, I don't know why, I was just really, I just had this warm feeling that I love the idea that somebody was reaching out to newcomers and saying, what is your story? And are you willing to share it with us? And how did you travel here? And that's such a traveling community that it's actually quite perfect.
It's quite perfect. It's the people, the immigrants who come to Canmore are, now we're getting more refugees, but, often it's people like Italian rock climbers who
right.
kind of fall in love and decide to stay, or
or Australians. I met a lot of Australians.
Yeah, we don't have any Australians. They speak English, but and then people from India who are accompanying their husband. I mean, someone from Nepal, Manisha from Nepal, who I adore, whose husband is a glaciologist studying the glaciers. So she came along and she was part of the Shoe Project. So yeah, there are, and it's a big tourist industry. So there are people who work in the restaurants and in the residences and so on at the back center. Yeah.
Do you miss living in Alberta?
No, I mean, I love Canmore. I love to go there. And we go in the summers for a few months. We go at Christmas. We go in the spring. I don't ski the way I thought I would. But somehow if you have a house there and I've got involved in the town. It's a fabulous town. It's full full of sort of good works going on, and people are
Yes.
volunteering all over, and great things are happening. But I don't want to live there all the time. I have adopted Toronto in my 45 years here. I like to go to the museums and the theaters and do all the good things. I'm lucky to live in a part of Canmore where I can still walk and see trees.
Yes,
I really
yes.
do miss the trees. I've really, just talking about what changes in the pandemic, I have really come to believe and understand those people who say that just walking in a forest creates a feeling of peace and eases anxiety. It's so true.
Yes, yeah. I love the idea. Well, not the idea that, I mean, there's a lot of proof that trees are very healing, and these forest showers, and then there's all this research being done out west about the communication below the ground between trees. And I think we're just at the beginning of understanding the language and the healing abilities of trees. But speaking of the word healing, do you see your work now as part of healing and sharing, building relationships between people and different groups of people around the world?
Certainly I do with the Shoe Project. I certainly do. I really want to share those stories as far as we can. It's been a decade, and I am kind of stepping back. I am the founder. I'll still be on the board, but the women who are most deeply concerned in and affected in these issues of language and self-expression for newcomers.
Yes.
They will be taking over. One of the things that I do want to do from my sort of in the wings position here is to find outlets for those. We have 280 stories in an archive now. And I mean, you've seen some of them. They're stunning.
Yes.
They're all different, all these different shoes, different people's experiences coming here, what the shoes mean to them, the shoes they left behind, the shoes they dreamed they'd wear and never wore, the shoes for their baby who was born here. Anyway, I really like to see that. So
you know what we should do? We should have some of your or some of the writers in the group share their stories.
I think
I would love that.
Yeah. Well, if you did, they would, I can think of dozens.
Okay. We'll figure it out offline, but I think
that sounds great.
Because so many of the stories I was just profoundly impacted by. But now I know you're quite busy, so I don't want to keep you. And I know you're finishing or revisioning one of your books. What's next for you as a writer? What are you going to do next?
Well, as I kind of alluded to, I want to write about my generation now. I want to write about lights out. Is this the end of us? Yes, I'm afraid it is for some of us, but others go on. And who are we? What are we now? This is, I really want to get my feet flat back down on the ground that I stand, express, what have I learned? I mean, there comes a time as a writer, at least for me, where I think, I have kind of perhaps lost myself in the stories of all these other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's been fabulous. It's been fabulous. But I want to come back in here now, because I'm the only one who can do that.
Oh, yes. I think, well, I wonder, how many stories do we have that are about this new generation of people, right, who are in their 70s and 80s? And when I say they're new, never has there been a time where people in their 80s and 70s and 90s, because I've met lots of 90-year-old people who are well and happy, who have had access to technology the way they do, have access to their own health the way they do now, who have access to inventing themselves if they want to. When I was working actually in Canmore, I met some extraordinary women and some men, but they were mostly women in that retirement community who were in their late 80s and early 90s
Oh,
who
you see them walking up the mountain in the
yeah,
morning.
yeah, like just like just like and they are actually recreating their lives because their partners have passed or they're no longer they don't have families the way they used to, and they're in good health. And I think you you know they're active mentally, emotionally,
Mhm.
sexually. I mean, I want to know that there's something better that I'm going to go towards as well, and so I think it's important what you're thinking about right now.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I was really fortunate in my parents. I realize this more and more. Dad died at 99 and mom at 95, but they showed us how to get old. You know,
Hmm.
they looked after themselves. They took all the vitamins. They did their daily walks, but they kept alive and they knew young people and they helped people. They read, and I want that. I People keep saying, "Oh, your parents were so long lived. You for sure that will happen to you." Well, it's actually not for sure. I think medical
Yeah.
science says it's only something like 4% of the prediction of your final age
Hmm.
comes from the prediction of your parents' age. But I seriously want to have at least 20 more years, 25 years,
Of
in which
course.
I can change and think and write and redevelop. And plus, we're lucky at our age to have access to our children and our grandchildren.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
yes.
that's really a fantastic thing for me to see. And to imagine my 6-year-old grandson, Sebastian, what's it going to be like for him, and just to try to watch him and give him some skills.
Hmm.
So we
Yeah,
can we can put all that in what we have to say.
yeah, and the currency of now is that we're living together, experiencing each other and experiencing life together. So yeah, I would love to have you back on the show, and I'd love to have some of the shoe project participants share their stories, because I think there are a lot of people, our audiences around the world, but I think there's a lot of people who not just will be inspired, but it's a kind of role modeling when you hear somebody voice their story and tell you a little bit about where they are now. It's really very liberating. So thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you
Thank you
for
for having me here, Shay. It's really been great to talk to you.
thank you for your bravery, and your consistent work ethic with writing and creating and sharing all these different stories about people, and then what you're doing now. So I look forward to the next work, and I look forward to you coming on. Katherine Govier, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Shay Marville. You are a marvel indeed.
I'm Shay Marville, and you've been listening to Let's Talk, a podcast dedicated to healing and growing. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And listen, I need your help to grow the reach of this show. Would you please subscribe, rate, and review us on any platform that you're listening to? I'd love to hear your feedback. Ciao for now.